Elias Callaway was 43 years old, a managing partner at a private investment fund that had deployed capital into 23 companies over 14 years without losing money on a single exit. He drove a 9-year-old Land Cruiser he'd had the engine rebuilt on twice because it still ran correctly, and he saw no reason to replace something that ran correctly. He took long walks in the evenings to think through decisions he didn't want to get wrong. His neighbors had stopped trying to talk to him on those walks years ago. His expression during them was the expression of a man already somewhere else. On a Thursday evening in April, his wife Dana packed 2 suitcases, carried them to the car in the garage she had finished himself, and told him she was in love with someone from work. She said she needed to be with someone ambitious in a way she could actually see. What she did not know, what neither she nor the man she was leaving for had any reason to know, was that Elias's fund had led the Series C financing of her company 14 months earlier. That $31 million on Verado Systems' balance sheet had his signature on the wire, that he had recognized her consulting firm's name in an audit report 8 weeks ago and had been sitting on what it meant ever since. She thought she was leaving a man who couldn't keep up with her world. She was leaving the man who owned the majority stake in it. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The office was quiet when Elias arrived at 6:03 in the morning. He went in early on days when he needed to read, not email, documents, term sheets, financial statements, the operating reports his portfolio companies filed quarterly. He had a team of 7 at Meridian Equity Partners, and they handled the day-to-day relationship with each company in the portfolio. Elias handled the decisions that required someone who had read everything. He had been doing this for 14 years. He had started the fund at 29 with a single LP commitment and a reputation he had built at 2 larger firms by being the one person in every diligence meeting who had actually read the whole document. Not the summary, the document. Meridian Equity Partners held minority stakes in 23 companies across technology infrastructure, logistics, and professional services. The stakes ranged from 8% to 41%. Elias knew the financial condition of every one of them the way a physician knows the condition of a patient. Not just the number on the chart, but what the number meant given everything else the chart contained. He drove the Land Cruiser because it was reliable. He wore the same watch his father had worn. He took his walks in the evenings and came back with decisions already made, which he wrote on a yellow legal pad in the morning before the team arrived. He was not the kind of man who made noise about what he was building. He was the kind of man who had already built it before most people knew he was working. He didn't know, those mornings, that Dana had been planning the exit for 9 months. He knew something had changed, something in the angle of her body at the kitchen table, in the specific brightness she carried home some evenings that had nothing to do with him. He had told himself it was the company. He had extended the benefit of the doubt because that was what he did when the evidence wasn't complete. He just hadn't understood yet that the evidence was in his own portfolio. He heard her on the stairs at 6:47 that Thursday evening. The sound was specific, 2 trips, the weight of it distributed differently than just a bag and a coat. He was at the kitchen table with a fund quarterly when she came through with the first suitcase. She set it by the door to the garage. She went back upstairs. She came down with the second one. She was in the clothes she wore for important meetings. He noticed that. He noticed the way she had her keys already in her hand, and the way she stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall with her shoulders set, the way she set them when she had made a decision and was finished making it. "I need to say something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." He set the quarterly on the table. He folded his hands on top of it. "I've been seeing someone," she said. "It's been going on for a while, and I'm not going to tell you it wasn't real, because it was. I'm not going to tell you nothing was wrong with us, because things have been wrong for a long time. I think you know that." She took a breath. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I'm finally being honest with myself about what I need." He looked at her. "I need someone who is ambitious in a way I can actually see," she said. "Someone who is in the room where things are happening. Someone whose work I can feel." She paused. "I don't think that's you. I don't think it's ever been you. And I'm sorry I waited this long to say it." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about an audit report that had crossed his desk 8 weeks ago, about a line item, Stratline Advisory Group, $2 3M Strategic Consulting Services. About the way that name had sat in his chest when he read it, the quiet, specific weight of a thing you've been carrying without knowing you were carrying it. Who? He said. She held his gaze. It doesn't matter who. He nodded once. He looked at the table. He had heard her mention Stratline once, 8 months ago. She called it a small consulting project. Just a few months of work. She had said it the way she said things she didn't want him to ask about, flatly, without color, the verbal equivalent of a door half closed. He had filed it away. He had not decided yet what it meant. Now he knew what it meant. All right, he said. He didn't stand. He didn't follow her to the garage. He listened to the door close and the engine turn over and the sound of her tires on the concrete. He sat at the kitchen table with the quarterly in front of him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Vivian. 2.5 years before that Thursday, Elias had spent 4 consecutive weekends helping Dana prepare her materials for the VP of Strategy role at Verado Systems. She had been recruited from a smaller firm, and the leap was significant, a company at a different scale, a different expectation level, a different kind of pressure. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and worked through her first 90 days, framework with the same methodical attention he brought to every diligence process. He had helped her build the narrative for her first board presentation. He had reviewed her competitive analysis. He had told her which assumptions were defensible and which ones would get challenged and how. She had landed the role. She had been extraordinary in it. He knew this because she told him, and later because he heard it from places she didn't know he was listening. He had attended one company event during her time at Verado, a charity gala the company co-sponsored in the fall of the year before. He went as Dana's husband. He wore a dark suit. He shook hands and made conversation and let the evening move around him without distinguishing himself in any way. Toward the end of the night, Conrad Webb, the CEO, mid-40s, the kind of man who moved through rooms like he had already decided how they were going to end, had stopped to talk to them. He had looked at Dana when he said it, but he had spoken to Elias. You're lucky to have someone like her. She sees the strategy when most people are still looking at the data. There was something in the warmth of it that wasn't entirely professional, a warmth that arrived too easily, too familiar for a man speaking to a colleague's spouse. Elias had noticed it. He hadn't said anything about it. He had filed it away the way he filed things, without announcement, without deciding yet what it meant. That had been 8 months before Vivian flagged the Stratline contract. He had not connected Conrad Webb to Stratline Advisory Group. Not then. He had not connected Verado Systems to Stratline because Vivian handled the portfolio audit and he received the exceptions report, not the raw data. He had not connected Stratline to Dana because she had mentioned it once briefly, and he had let the half-closed door stay half-closed. He had extended trust past the evidence the way he sometimes did, in the places where trust cost him more than it should have. That was what she hadn't understood. Until the Thursday, everything changed. Vivian O.C. picked up on the second ring. She had been Meridian Equity Partners' informal compliance advisor for 6 years. Before that, she had spent 30 years as general counsel at a series of venture capital firms, the last 12 years as a senior partner at one of the in the country. She was 64 years old, small, straight-backed. With silver hair she kept precisely cut and reading glasses she wore on her face rather than on a chain because she was always reading. She had a gift for finding the thing other people had tried to hide. Not through aggression, through patience and a complete refusal to accept documents that didn't add up. She had flagged the Stratline contract 8 weeks ago as a routine exceptions item. Elias had read the line, recognized the name, and asked her to pull the full record. She had pulled the full record. Come over, she said. I'll have everything laid out. Her study had a long work table she had built to hold documents without stacking them. By the time Elias arrived that night, 3 organized sections were already waiting for him. I'll walk you through it in order, she said. Don't say anything until I'm finished. She opened the first section. Stratline Advisory Group had been incorporated 18 months ago. The registered agent was a law firm in the city. The managing member listed in the operating agreement filed with the state was Dana Calloway. He had known it would be her name. He had known since he read the exceptions report. He had still needed to see it in writing. He set his hands flat on the table. He looked at the document. He did not say anything. There's more, Vivian said. She opened the second section. The Stratline contract with Verado Systems was dated 9 months ago, $230,000 per month. 12 months of engagement, $2. $76 million total with $2. $3 million already paid. The contract scope was ongoing strategic advisory services. The approval signature on the Verado side was Conrad Webb's. There was no disclosure of the relationship between the contracting parties in the Verado board materials, in the cap table, or in the representations made to investors at the close of the Series C. Elias looked at the contract date. He thought about the gala in the fall, the warmth in Conrad Webb's voice. The month the contract was signed was 1 month after that evening. He looked at the approval signature. He thought about Meridian Equity Partners' investment in Verado Systems, about the fund vehicle, about the fact that in all of Verado's board meetings, Meridian was represented by a junior partner named Ellis, not by Elias himself, that Conrad Webb had been in those meetings with a man whose name rhymed with his principles and had never had reason to connect the two, that Dana had worked at Verado for 18 months before Elias had taken the time to look at the Verado operating report personally. They had all been in the same room without being in the same room. He looked at Vivienne. "Pull the Meridian LP agreement for Verado," he said. Section 11. She was already opening the third section. Section 11 of the Meridian Equity Partners LP agreement with Verado Systems granted the lead investor the right to call a special board review and initiate a CEO performance evaluation upon documented evidence of undisclosed related party transactions involving company funds. Vivienne set a red tab page in front of him. She had already marked the exact clause. He stood up. He walked to Vivienne's window and looked at the street. A car passed. The streetlights were on. He stood there for a while, not dramatically, just long enough to let everything finish settling into its right shape. Then he came back to the table and looked at everything together. The Stratline operating agreement, the contract, the Verado LP agreement, the cap table showing Meridian Equity Partners as the 39% majority investor, his name behind the fund name, his money behind the operations, his wife's firm taking $2, $3 million of it through a contract her CEO had signed without disclosing what it was. He could see the whole shape of it, every line connecting to the next. "File the Section 11 notice," he said. "Formal board review, 30 days. Vivienne reached over and refilled his coffee without saying anything. He didn't move fast. That was the part neither of them had been able to account for. Conrad Webb had built a career on moving fast, on momentum, on the confidence of the room, on the particular advantage that comes from being the one who decides the pace. Dana had built her definition of ambition around the same quality. Visible motion, rooms where things were happening, energy you could feel. Neither of them had ever learned to watch a man who didn't move at all and still won. Roland Price, Elias's personal attorney, drafted the formal Section 11 notice that Friday. It was delivered to Verado's registered agent by Meridian Equity Partners Fund Counsel that Monday. The language was procedural and neutral. It notified the board that the lead investor was exercising its right to a formal review. It scheduled a special board meeting for 30 days out. It listed in attachment the preliminary scope of the review, compensation structures, undisclosed related party transactions, and executive governance. The notice went to the board, not to Conrad specifically, not yet. Conrad's response, relayed through Verado's general counsel, was cordial. He welcomed the review. He said the company was in excellent shape and looked forward to presenting the full picture to its investors. His tone, as described to Elias by Roland, had the quality of a man who was not yet concerned, who had received investor inquiries before and handled them and saw no reason to treat this differently. He did not know who was coming. Dana called Elias on a Wednesday evening, 11 days after she left. He let it ring once. He picked up. "I want to make sure we can keep this civil," she said. Her voice was composed, measured. "I'm not trying to make this complicated." "It won't be complicated," he said. A pause. "Are you seeing someone?" It was a strange question given the circumstances. He understood what she was really asking, whether he was going to make things difficult, whether there was going to be anger, whether the quiet of the last 11 days meant something he was building up toward. "I'll see you at the board meeting," he said. A longer pause. "What board meeting?" "Verado has a special board review in 3 weeks," he said. "You'll be there, I think." She didn't say anything for a moment. He could hear her calibrating. "Why would you be at a Verado board meeting?" she said. "Because I called it," he said. He ended the call. Vivienne was at the table across from him. She had heard the whole thing. She didn't say anything. She refilled his coffee. Elias arrived at Verado Systems boardroom on the 17th floor at 8:16 in the morning. The meeting was scheduled for 9. He liked arriving when the room was still empty. The boardroom had floor-to-ceiling glass along the north wall and a long conference table that seated 16. There were fresh water glasses at every place. The city was visible in every direction, clear and bright at this hour, the kind of morning where the light showed everything exactly as it was. He sat at the far end of the table, not the head, not the center, a position from which he could see both doors. Roland arrived at 8:35, Vivian at 8:47. Meridian's fund counsel, a composed man named Dr. Ashford, who had filed the Section 11 notice, arrived at 8:52. They arranged documents in 4 organized binders. The room was quiet, the boardroom variety of quiet, formal, anticipatory, the kind that precedes something structural. The Verado board members arrived between 8:50 and 9:05. 4 independent directors who had received only the procedural notice and believed they were attending a standard investor review. They settled. They reviewed their materials. At 9:08, Conrad Webb came through the east door. He came in the way he always came in, ahead of the room, moving with the composed confidence of a man who had decided how this was going to go. He was in a dark suit. He had a folder under his arm. He glanced at the board members, acknowledged one with a quick nod, and turned toward the head of the table. He stopped. Dana came through the door 2 steps behind him and stopped at the same moment. They saw Elias at the same time. It happened in less than 3 seconds. Conrad's expression moved through 3 distinct things: recognition, confusion, the specific recalculation of a man whose understanding of a room has just been entirely revised. His eyes went from Elias's face to the nameplate on the binder in front of him, Meridian Equity Partners, to Roland, to Dr. Ashford, and back to Elias. Dana's expression was different. Hers moved through more. It had the quality of a structure that had been load-bearing without knowing it was load-bearing and had just been told. They both sat down. Neither of them said anything. Dr. Ashford opened the meeting at 9:11. Thank you all for attending. Meridian Equity Partners has called this review pursuant to Section 11 of its LP agreement with Verado Systems, which permits a formal board evaluation upon documented evidence of undisclosed related party transactions. I'm going to walk through the findings in order. He opened the first binder. 9 months ago, Verado Systems entered into a strategic advisory engagement with an entity called Stratline Advisory Group at a monthly rate of $230,000. Total payments to date, $3 million. This engagement was not disclosed in board materials, was not presented for board approval, and was not disclosed to investors at any point during or after the Series C close. He placed the contract on the table. The managing member of Stratline Advisory Group is Dana Calloway, who currently serves as Verado's VP of Strategy. One of the independent directors looked up from the document. His expression was the expression of a man who had just understood something about several prior conversations. Dr. Ashford placed the second document. Section 11 requires the board to evaluate whether any undisclosed related party transaction represents a breach of fiduciary duty. The applicable standard in the LP agreement is whether a reasonably informed board would have required disclosure of the relationship between the contracting parties prior to contract execution. A pause. Meridian's position is that the answer to that question is yes, and that the failure to disclose represents a material governance breach. Conrad's folder was still on the table in front of him unopened. He had not opened it. He was looking at the document Dr. Ashford had placed with the expression of a man reading something he had believed was private. Vivian placed the third document, the full audit trace. Dr. Ashford walked through it, the contract approval signature, the payments by quarter, the absence of any board record. The Stratline operating agreement with Dana's name on it, filed 3 months before the contract was signed. The room was very still. Elias stood. He buttoned his jacket. He picked up nothing from the table. He looked at the board members and nodded once. He shook Roland's hand. He walked toward the west door. He stopped. Not to Dana, to Conrad. You've been running this company on my money for 14 months, he said, quietly. Factually, not as performance. I've had a long time to watch how a man acts when he thinks no one who matters is paying attention. He turned to Dana. You said you needed someone ambitious in a way you could see, he said. I'm sorry I made you wait this long to find out. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The board met in closed session the following day and the day after that. The Section 11 findings were presented to outside counsel. Conrad Webb's position as CEO was placed under formal review. The conclusion of that review, 6 weeks later, was a negotiated separation, a board-approved transition that allowed Conrad to exit without the matter becoming a regulatory filing in exchange for a full repayment of the $3 million in Stratline payments and a cooperation agreement with Meridian's Fund Counsel. Stratline Advisory Group's engagement with Verado terminated the same week. Dana resigned from her VP role 3 days after the board meeting. She did not contest the separation. The man she had left Elias for was no longer a CEO by the end of May. Elias's fund installed an interim CEO at Verado, a woman named Priya who had turned around 2 other companies in the Meridian portfolio and who had, in her first week, identified 3 additional operational efficiencies Conrad had missed. Verado's performance metrics improved over the following 2 quarters. The Series D, which Conrad had been hoping to close at a specific valuation, closed 4 months later at a higher one, under new leadership that had cleaned the books and earned it. Elias's name was on the investor documentation as it had always been. He was at his desk by 6:03 every morning. He read documents. He made decisions. He sent them to the team in a sequence that moved like a well-run job site. Everything in order. Everything timed correctly. Nothing moving before it was ready. He still took his walks in the evenings. He still had the expression on those walks of a man who was already somewhere else. He took them a little later now. The days were longer. On an evening in late October, Elias Callaway walked the same 3-mile route he had walked for 6 years, through the neighborhood and around the park and back. The trees were almost gone. The last of the light was orange above the roof lines to the west. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and his phone on the desk at home. He didn't bring it on walks. He thought better without it. He thought about a fun quarterly he needed to read before Friday, about the Priya situation at Nevado, which was going well, about a company he'd been watching for 2 months that was about to become interesting, about a decision he was still a few days from being ready to make. He walked past the ginkgo tree at the corner of Alderton and 5th that turned gold every October right on schedule. He had been watching it turn gold for 6 years. It had never failed to turn on time. He stood under it for a moment. He looked up through the branches. Then he put his hands back in his pockets and kept walking. There was work to do tomorrow. There always was. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.